Wonderful. So it's the 15th of October, 2022, and it's an incredibly mad year, and it's the 35th anniversary of the assassination of Thomas Sankara. And it's the 1-year anniversary of the Jubilee movement, which we began last year with Nick and Daisy and Marvina. So a lot of people in this room, and since then, so much has changed. So many things have changed, not just within the movement, but also politically and in the kind of global landscape. It's been a really tumultuous year, and personally for a lot of us as well, it's been a difficult time. So it's really good to see everyone here. I want to make this a really short introduction so we can get into hearing from our amazing panelists. And we've got I'll kind of give a tiny introduction before everyone speaks, but the order of today, I was hoping we'd simply hear from all of our panelists. That's Marvina, Nick, Sara, Prince from Africans Rising, Shiri, Phoenix, and Sali, if he can make it. And then after they've had their moment to speak about kind of whatever you want, but the structure, the sort of focus today is the title, is Mutual Aid, Community Power, and so I'm just going to let someone in, and system change. And this, I think, is something that's really close to everyone here's hearts, but in different way. And some of the context for this is that we began working to build mutual aid groups. We began really focusing on that as a tactic, having kind of bedded into what was and wasn't working in some of the movement tactics that were existing, looking deeper in how to really create power in the positive sense of that, not the sort of exploitative power, but the kind of power that can start to reclaim communities, that comes from communities. It's the power in people power when we're using that with our real best intentions. And so mutual aid seemed to be a strategy that would work for doing that. And obviously mutual aid has got an incredibly long history, even if you can call it a history, because as Kropotkin, who's the first person to sort of really formalize that term mutual aid, said, it's a factor in evolution. The way in which humans cooperate and that success in cooperation and mutual aid is just as much a determinant of evolution as everything that was posited by the Darwinists. So mutual aid is so much part of our core identity, but it's also something that seems to be lost in this current system. Or at least hidden, pushed down, divided, made so much harder. And then during COVID, there were so many mutual aid groups that popped up in the UK and around the world. It seemed like COVID gave people permission to ask for support and to provide support. And we found actually really in the last few months how few of these groups are functioning, certainly to the same level that they were during that time. It seems like now, since the sort of news of the pandemic, the heat around the pandemic has gone away, that it's much harder to cut through that and to do that. But it's going to be so important to build power in a way that's really sustainable, and to start building that left movement, that groundswell of movement that can really bed into that can really cross a lot of the ideological divides that sometimes pop up between us. I was with Melinda Jenke the other day outside the World Bank, where we were protesting, and she said something really amazing, saying the enemies never sleep. The enemy is united by greed, and the left, we are divided by ideology. And she said it in a really, I think, important context here of trying to find ways. Through looking at debt and climate and Jubilee and the history of debt cancellation, we've tried to find something that can really unite and cut across a lot of the divisions that sometimes happen at the edges of our margins and our movements, whether it's climate or anything else. We often end up tactically really focused on something, but getting further and further away from the root, and unintentionally, because we all think that everyone should be able to get behind what we're getting behind, that can alienate other people who don't see it from the same beginning as we do. So we found debt to be an important route there that links us internationally with the cancellation of debts and the need for reparations, but also locally between classes, between people here, and to bridge the inequalities that there are. So we've tried to combine these things of debt and inequality and healing those divisions and mutual aid as this vital way to do that, but with a long game of system change. And so that's why we've chosen that title today, Mutual Aid, Community Power, System Change. And we'd love to hear from our speakers who've all got experience, in incredible amounts of experience in different movements from different backgrounds, with different experience of these three two-word phrases and other things, but also just amazing people who are working so hard in the UK and in Africa right now. So I'd like to, if that's okay, pass the floor over to Marvina. Welcome. Marvina, are you there? Okay, we might be missing Marvina for now, so we'll jump back to her maybe as our next speaker. So Phoenix, I think you were keen to go next. Would you be okay to speak now about what you do, what you're doing? Oh, it's a tough start. It's a tough start. We've lost Marvina and we've lost Phoenix. Everyone's all on trains and really busy running around. Okay. Okay, well, when they're
Hello,
back...
right, we're unmuted.
Yeah,
can you hear me?
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Phoenix.
Right. So, okay. So, mutual aid and system change. Very good to see this assembled group here. Really important work. Yeah, mutual aid. There were, you know, it's an old anarchist principles, and there was over 2,000. There was over 2,000 mutual aid groups set up during COVID, and it was a lot of anarchist groups started them off, and then councils started to jump on board and actually say, hey, it's really good what these mutual aid groups are doing. So it shows that in emergencies, which we are in, you know, social and environmental crisis at the moment, groups can form and do things very effectively. After the Occupy movement, after Hurricane Sandy, it was actually the Occupy movement, Occupy Sandy, that was more effective in getting there and helping people in the first few days, more effective than the FEMA group. So you can hear me, can you guys? Yeah. Hello? Yeah, you can. Okay, cool. All right. So basically, mutual aid, community power. How do we build community power, and how do we bring about system change? To me, it's so important that, you know, we don't just hack at the tentacles of the octopus. We have to go to the center and change the whole system. You know, how do we go about creating that? And one of the ways to do it is, you know, creating more community power. Just one of the things that climate emergency centers do is they're the baseline, creating a space where an alliance of local community groups can come together. I've run like 30 years of eco community centers, and 7 or 8 waves of the big environmental and social justice movements have come through those centers. 25 years they were squatted. For the last 7 years they've been doing legal ones. And you know, they've organized meetings and painted banners and conferences, talks, workshops, all sorts. If you don't have a community space to organize in, it's very hard to paint a 30-foot banner in your mum's front room. You know, communities need space. So during the lockdown, I wrote a handbook, How to Set Up a Climate Emergency Centre in 10 Steps. It's kind of 30 years of knowledge, and it's there on the website, climateemergencycentre.co.uk. We did lots of Zooms to groups all around the country, and like Mycelium, they've popped up all over, you know, through the tail end of lockdown and into now. There are now 19 of them all across the country, from Islington to Wandsworth to Staines to Lewes to Taunton to Totnes, up to Preston, new ones opening in Leeds soon, hopefully. It's an idea that time has come, and we really need these spaces to meet and organise. And it's not just about one group using it. We put it out through the Transition Towns Network, through XR, through Friends of the Earth, through lots of different groups. And the idea is it brings together an alliance of 15, 20 different groups all across town from all different walks of life, genders and political persuasions or ideas, you know, from students groups to, you know, women's groups to LGBT groups to, you know, green groups. We need space to meet and to organise. And if we want to change the system, we need a space to meet, organise and discuss. One of the things we want to do is have people's assemblies in the climate emergency centres every couple of months that feed two ways. One into the centre organising circle of coordinators, and the other one is out to the local authority or council. We started the first one of them the other day in Islington, had a people's assembly on clean air. So I don't know how long you want me to speak for, but I just basically, you know, one of the things I want to say is when XR started, I was talking to an old friend Jamie from New Internationalist Editor, who's involved with the Occupy movement, and he was saying about citizen assemblies and people's assemblies, and I was like, great, let's get on and set up people's assemblies all over. There's another term called dual power, where you set up parallel organisations, and really what we need is people's assemblies happening everywhere. On the first day of the Occupy movement, there were over 900 cities occupied, having assemblies, discussing the kind of futures they wanted to see. And that was, you know, we scarcely could have dreamed of that back in the mid-90s in the Reclaim the Streets days. You know, I've been active for a long time, and I really want to see these spaces come together. So all of the good projects and campaigns that, you know, all of us are talking about, they need a space to meet and to organise. And I suppose that's the bedrock of what climate emergency centres can be. There's a recipe in there where any not-for-profit or charity can get up to 100% off the business rates and save the owner money on these buildings. So it's a win-win-win situation. It's a win for the local council because they get to say they're doing something and hopefully actually do something on the climate emergency when they're hamstringed by lack of funds and resources. The property owner saves money, and then the local community gets a space to meet, organise. It's good for the environment. It's good for, you know, people can set up little eco enterprises. You know, it's a space where many different things can happen. And I've seen the magic that happens at these spaces over the years: talks, workshops, meetings, parties, events, you know, action meetings that have gone on to create all sorts of actions, projects and movements. So just reaching out to all of you. There may be a group around you. Check out climateemergencycentre.co.uk. There is a map there. We're also trying to link up with land climate emergency centres so that you can cross-pollinate city to country. I would really like to see there be more land occupation. Talking about, we've got a Land Workers Alliance meeting just demo behind us in Parliament Square. You know, 1%, 5% own 75% of the land in this country. We need to free up the buildings for the community. Every community can see empty buildings, and we need to redistribute land. One of the original meanings, I'll probably sum up soon because I don't know how long you got, but one of the original meanings of Jubilee, we heard back in the Occupy days, we were getting evicted from the School of Ideas, and this lady turned up and she said, do you know the real meaning of Jubilee? It comes from the Bible. And apparently every 50 years they redistribute land and wealth. And the reason they do that is because if they don't do it every 50 years, the gap between rich and poor becomes so rich, so big, that there turns into a violent uprising and problems and social unrest. So, you know, we all need to learn from that. How do we create more centres and spaces, link with more bits of land, create system change, ecocide law, whatever it is, you know, have people's assemblies regularly. Just, you know, between me and you, we had a meet with the government department recently as the Climate Emergency Centres Network, and they don't know what to do. You know, our government is asleep at the wheel. And unless we get together in our communities, reclaim buildings and land, and work with building owners and landowners to create the kind of sustainable futures we want to see, then, you know, it's going to get pretty bad. We need to focus on the solutions. Let's put the vision across of what we want to see for the future, you know, and live them and show them on the high streets. That's, you know, what's amazing with some of the climate emergency centres. They've really got a whole load of solutions in there on the high street, from zero waste shops to, you know, cargo bikes and vegan cafes and parent swap shops and things. So there's lots of things we can do, but we need the spaces to organise. So I'll probably sum up there, but if you check out climateemergencycentre.co.uk, there's a lot of information there on the website, and we run a charity, spacegenerators.org. You can get in touch with us. We can help groups set up and negotiate with owners and try and get buildings. But try and link with a group in your area or set one up. And from there, let's have regular monthly people's assemblies and create system change. And Climate Emergency Centre is about solutions. We really need to focus on the solutions. What is the world we want to see? We protest a lot against things, but we need to put just as much energy or more into what we want to see, the system change and the renewables and the solutions. Okay, I don't know how long we got, but that's probably me verbal at you enough from Parliament Square. I hope you heard most of that. Keep networking and get in touch with us. We would love to hear about your project and finding a space and helping groups near you. Thank you. Over to Rob. Over.
We did hear that. Thank you so much, Phoenix. That's brilliant. And there are a few questions for you in the chat. I know you're on your phone, but they've already popped up.
Oh, yeah. Can you say, because I can't see it?
Yeah, I'll just read them out really quickly. The first one is if you would be able to distill the handbook into a few key points, if that's even possible. But also, yes. I guess, yeah.
Okay, yeah, go on.
No, go for that. Go for
that one. Okay, to distill the handbook into, it's how to set up a climate emergency centre in 10 points. This is the whole thing in the nutshell, the kind of model. If you are we found this out about 7 years ago. If you are a not-for-profit company or a charity, you can apply for something called discretionary business rates form. You just Google it for your council. And as long as you show that you're doing 4 or 5 things to help the community, you know, arts, community, music, something for the youth, something for the elders, they will give you up to 100% off the business rates. If you're a charity, you get 80% off automatically. All of these empty buildings you can see in your communities, they're paying empty building rates, business rates after the first 3 months. A 3-story office block paying £100,000. So can you imagine the owner of that building, if you come as a charity, say where you can save you £100,000, in this model, hopefully you save them that £100,000, and then they sometimes, not definitely, they can optionally give you back like a certain amount. You might get £10,000 to start up your new project. That's the whole model in a nutshell. And the 10 steps are basically from the old squatting workshop, really. Get your team together, set up a legal entity, contact your council, contact the local regeneration officer and whatever, and say, can you link us to developers and people who own empty buildings, and then work together with them, build working groups, and, you know, one for legal entity, one for finding buildings, one for events and workshops, that kind of thing. And then have fun and put some parties on and bring lots of people in and take action every day. That's it in a nutshell. Next question, over.
That's amazing, Phoenix. And just one other really quick one so we can move on is there a climate emergency centre in South London?
There is a Zoom meeting. I think they've booked for November the 19th, but I can't remember exact date. I think so. I can put it in chat if I find. Where there's about 20 or 30 people coming from Southwark and Lambeth. There is already a group there. If you go to the website, there's a woman called Lisa. If you go to the website, click on the map, there's an email for them. But they've been there for about a year and they're still trying to find buildings. They had been using another building, the Makery or something. But yeah, there's a meeting soon, and hopefully we'll get them a building. Over.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Phoenix. And so we'll move quickly on to Marvina. Are you still there? Amazing.
Yes, I am. Brilliant. So I'm in a cafe at Richbeck, so you might hear music in the background, but it is what it is because it's the Chris Cup conference in like a couple of minutes. But I'm here, like I have committed to this just because you all are amazing, and this is such an important day for all of us to be in this space talking about mutual aid.
So do you want to, I kind of, you're doing so many things, so it's always really hard to introduce you. You've just started up a new initiative, which sounds amazing. Obviously you're with the Chris Carver event today. Would you be able to talk a little bit about what you're doing and also how you can see us sort of building community power, exactly, you know, what we're trying to do, and from your perspective?
It's so funny that you even say that. At the back of my top, I've got something saying community power, building communities. I think supporting the Chris Kaba campaign, I'm learning allyship in a different way. What you can see, Chris Kaba was a young black man who was shot by the police on the 5th of September. He was not chased. I remember when the news came out, the media tried to play it out as so many other things. It was a covert operation, which definitely took this young man's life within 15 to 20 seconds of his engagement with the police. I've just recently launched a beautiful project around Black Boy Joy, looking about Black boys' mental health and well-being. As Black people, we're not allowed to be in a space of joy. What gives us joy once we step into a society that is rooted in racism? We find ourselves always standing in this space of anxiety and trauma because of our experiences. And when we explain that to people, it almost doesn't come across real because we have such different lifestyle. With Black Boy Joy and Speak Up campaign, I think what Rob was trying to say around there's so much things I do because the fight cannot be won. You have to look at all the inequalities that might make me as an intersectional individual providing this information to say who's missing from the conversation. So as I'm fighting for Chris Kaba family, I'm also fighting to make sure Black boys who are witnessing what's happened to him know that it's okay not to be okay. It's traumatic to go through. And in that conversation, we can link that back to like climate justice, Jubilee for climate, and those conversations. The intersectionality of that fight too. I'm a Nigerian, and even right now as I'm speaking, the part of Nigeria I'm from, which is the Delta region, is facing climate crisis as we speak. It's not, when we say act now, sometimes people think it's a far future, but for Global South, it's now. And this is why Thomas Sankara Day is so important, because he was letting us know about this, letting us explore this. What does it look like for us to join? Because there's no way for us to talk about climate change, climate justice without racial justice. So there's an intersectionality of all the work I do. So it might seem like I go on a tangent. I talk about climate justice, I talk about Chris Kaba, and I talk about like mental health work. But unfortunately for a lot of people of color, we have to wear that, we have to take that weight on, because I have to acknowledge the privilege I have as a Black woman who has the platform and the connections that I have. Not a lot of Black women have that space. So the same way I say to my allies to check their privilege is the same way I check my privilege. So when it comes to mutual aid, how can we support? It's a lot sometimes for, it's a lonely and a tiring space to be in, where you are always having to strategically birth ideas, support people, and do what we do. And I don't think it's just me, but like loads of other activists must feel this burnout. But for women of color or people of color in the space, we don't know what respite looks like. We don't get, like, I think I heard about, I think maybe from Exile or Alfie, just explaining that like activists can go to places where they can just stop and rest. And I had to reflect on it to look at a lot of people I knew in the BLM movement or even in the environmental space who are people of color. That sounded mythical to us. Mutual aid is saying, how do you support your person of color or migrants from any ethnic like background? How do you support them in this work that they're doing? Because we can make this change if we come together and look at ways that we can liberate each other, how we can uplift each other, how we can use each other's voices. But if we don't find ways of how can I be of service to you when you see someone from an ethnic minority background leading any campaign, your silence is felt more than the words you say. So it'd be great for us to look at ways with Jubilee for Climate, with key partners around mutual aid, to look at skills, resources that can be shared to create change. So with Justice for Chris Carver, we need more people to know about it. So a simple thing will be like, how do we work together to look at the intersectionality with climate change and racial justice and police brutality? What can we do? We can't come to protest if we're scared that us just driving our car, cycling or going to work, we will be attacked. So what can our allies do in this space to potentially create some solution with that? With the cost of living, we've noticed a lot of the conversation doesn't really highlight ethnic minorities' voices in the sense of showing what that disparity would look like. So if working class people are going through it right now, can you imagine what ethnic minorities in these spaces are going through? And at the same time, we need to think about how do we decolonize our spaces when it comes to the environmental space. The global south is going to be hit by, or is being hit and being choked out in the system right now. But how often is our voices heard or listened to? And how much opportunities with all the projects you do you create opportunities for ethnic minority voice to shine? I think I'm rambling through a lot of things that I don't know if I'm like bombarding you guys with so much information, like problems and solutions or ways you can be an ally in the process. But the most important thing for me is sometimes just give someone a call and just check in and just say, how are you doing today? What's going on with you? Do you want to have a coffee? Do you want to, it's just important to sometimes check on those your strong activists that you look up to or you think are amazing, because 99% of the time they're taking care of everybody else and there's no one taking care of them. I don't know if this makes sense. And mental health is real. Activism space is also toxic. And we need to look at ways that we can do some things around that. Big up to Phoenix, all the stuff you do. Thank you for having us in your space and doing some exhibition. But I have to really take a moment to really celebrate Jubilee for Climate. These conversations that we're having, even though I'm in London and I'm not in one of your gatherings where we break bread and we have conversations, I think it's really important to celebrate the team and what they're doing and how they bring unity into the space. It brings an alternative and a refresher into what allyship looks like, what community looks like, what solidarity looks like, radical solidarity. Thank you, I'm Marvina Newton. I don't know if I touched all the stuff. When I'm in London, like my allergies and the air here is just totally different compared to Yorkshire, I promise you. So the pollution in London is real. I don't know how you guys do it in London, but chin up.
Thank you so much, Marvina.
I don't know if I did anything in a, I feel like I just threw a lot of information into the space and
no, it was really good. And I think you also touched on something that I don't want to let kind of go unheard and sort of highlighted, which is that like this space, I think everyone here as activists have experienced how difficult this space is, and how, and that really is part of mutual aid as well in a way. You know, it's so hard to occupy a space where you're trying to create a system where the community is lending in. I'm just going to mute you, Marvina. It's super loud where you are. That's it. Where the community is lending in, it's so hard for that space to stay regenerative when the whole sort of system at the moment is then extracting that. You know, Phoenix said that, oh, and the councils got on board with the mutual aid groups around COVID and said, isn't it great what you're doing? And to an extent, it's good that they start giving some support there. But at the same time, it then sort of ends up propping up the system that ultimately, you know, we need to take down. And activists ourselves, so many of us here have really struggled to kind of balance all of the stresses here when you have to sacrifice a lot just to stay on the front line doing what you think's right. And then it's hard to get that support, or when you run yourself down to feel like you can be generous, and there are so many sort of psychological difficulties that come with that, and not feeling like there's this sort of going forward momentum. Yeah, Marvina.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, sometimes I'm just gonna share something, and this might sound silly. When we were running the Kill the Bill campaign, one of the most important things for me to look at bringing intersectional different activists together was to also acknowledge what barriers would stop certain people being able to take part. Sorry, I know you're enjoying the vibe of the music down here. Like, I'm literally living my best life in Rich Mix. But we looked at what would stop people, whether that would have been transportation, childcare, whether that would be like, you know, having a body or having someone there. I've noticed we were the only ones like not a lot of people think about that. Like, people would ask and say to you to travel down somewhere, but not even ask you like, how are you getting there? Like, do you have the resources? Is this thing of, there are lots of us who are in ethnic minority doing some great job, but be honest to you, we also sometimes hold 2 or 3 other jobs, and we might be parents and we might be all sorts of things. So it's very important for us to say, being an ally is also providing resources, providing opportunities to make someone be able, with the cost of living, know that you are thinking about their time, their expertise, their 10,000 hours of dealing with trauma as something that they're doing. So I'm going to stop now.
Thank you so much, Marvina. And yeah, something you love always. So let's, I really want to, we've got amazing speakers. I don't want to hurry anyone at all. So I want to give the floor over to somebody.
Okay, thank you all. Hi. Thank you all so much for the invitation. It's great to be in this space, you know, a year after we launched, and it's great to see that things are moving on nicely, as it were, with challenges, but also nicely. I'm not going to be long. I want to sort of reflect on some of my activism and experiences and research in terms of these 3 couplets, sort of concepts that we have, or challenges that we have: mutual aid, community power, and system change. So we find ourselves currently at the confluence of two critical moments, as it were, in human history. On the one hand, we have the climate and ecological emergency. On the other hand, we have inequality within and between countries. And at the center of all of those, and relating to mutual aid, community power, and system change, I would argue that lies this notion of collective action. How can we come together to act collectively, as it were? The collective action dilemma, as it were, is self-interest. So self-interest always comes in the way of people acting collectively together. And self-interest is not just about individual interests, it's also about in-group interests, and also it might be a national interest. We saw that very much with COVID and the distribution of vaccines and so on around the world. Most countries, or a lot of Western countries, were hoarding vaccines, where there are a lot of other countries in the world unable to get vaccines. So my experience with, and Phoenix touched on this a little bit, my experience in terms of mutual aid particularly, and community power, or trying to build community power, has been with the Transition Town movement, and I've been with the Transition Town movement for over 10 years now. working in Brixton in particular and working on various initiatives of mutual aid. And again, and Rob, this is something you also mentioned in your introduction there. I've forgotten who you paraphrased, but the enemy never sleeps, but the left is so divided. And what's often happens when you're trying to build solidarity or alliances within a community is that community is very simple, a very beguilingly simple concept. Community, most people think of a geographical concept of community, but within that geographical concept there are other communities and so on. And how do we cross all those different divides? They are socially constructed divides in many respects, but also we need to sort of speak to people, listen to people, and in fact, if we're able to appreciate the material and social concerns of people within our community, then we can start building bridges and building solidarity with different people within the community. So in Transition Town Brixton, we've had many initiatives along the lines of mutual aid, and the pandemic was a real time for us, where we're able to do a lot of food distribution initiatives and so on, and that was very good in terms of building solidarity. But again, what we find, and referring back to your the statement you paraphrased, is that we are so divided, as a society, or even as a community, whichever community you are. If it's multicultural community, you'll find a lot of divisions. But as has often been said, there's so many more things that unite us than divide us. So what we do in terms of Transition Town Brixton, in order to build bridge those divides, is to start with a vision, a future vision. So we say okay, how do you want our community to look like in 20 or 30 years time? If we start with that utopian vision, as it were, then we find that we backcast from that 30 or 20 years, and we try to find the common interests within those that time frame. It might be 10 years from the 20 or 30 years, and and then what institutions, for example, can we build within the community to, as Mr. Fuller said, to make the existing institutions seem obsolete. So we try to do that very much, but of course we need resources, and resource mobilization is one of the most difficult things facing any movement or group, community-based or otherwise, and that is a real issue that we have to face. Of course, we have to use the system in order to fight the system, so we have to recognize that as well. But very briefly, I want to go from Brixton to some research I did in Kampala, or just on the outskirts of Kampala in Uganda. And I think I might have told you, Rob and Daisy, the story, but this was, I worked in, I did research in a community, and this community were about 30 women who all had AIDS, and they had been ostracized by the greater society, or the wider society, wider community, because they had AIDS and they had children with them. So I worked with this NGO, and they found some land, and it was, a big piece of land for them. And these women with their children, who were shunned by the wider community, were able to, and this for me exemplifies what mutual aid really is about. They were able to come together, they were able to build their own housing units, one house for each person, build their own housing units, source their own water supply. They have their own garden, and they grow vegetables for the community, and any extra that they grow, they take to the markets and sell. And it's a market sort of further away from where they live, because the stigmatization of AIDS within that area is real, and so on. And you learn so much, or I learned so much. I took some students with me as well, I think 30 or 40 students, but we learned so much, from this community, that building community, number one, is not easy. It takes time. We often, we're so desperate for these things to happen so quickly that we see if we don't see any fruit of our action within a couple of months or even 6 months, we often think we have failed. No, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We have to keep going. But these women, they have been going for years and years. You know, this, I think, the third year, it will be, or the fourth year now, and they've been going for that long. I'll try to find some more details about it, you know, just to share with you all, because it really is one of the most inspiring studies or researches I've ever done. They're still going strong, you know. I think they're trying to get other women or try to open another center elsewhere in Uganda, where, of course, as I said, stigmatization is very real. So main thing I think to leave here is mutual aid is part of the solution. We cannot, you know, just look at mutual aid and think that mutual aid will transform the system, as it were. It will not. It's part of the solution. It's part of, you know, a lot of things that we need to look at differently, try to look at differently, unlearn and re-educate ourselves about the system differently. So mutual aid is part of that, but mutual aid on its own will not disrupt the setup as it is. So we have to appreciate that. What else did I write? Oh yeah, and massive respect to Sister Marvina there. She was talking about her area, her ancestral land in the Niger Delta, which is prone to the impacts of climate change. Just want to point out that in the last 2 or 3 days, there's been massive flooding in Nigeria, parts of Nigeria, and there's 500 people displaced. I'm sorry, 500 people dead and 1.4 million people displaced due to this flooding. And this flooding is as it were not anything new. This has been going on, and exactly as Sister Marvina said, you know, it's happening now. It's been going on for ages. You know, the global South, countries in the global South have been trying to tell us these issues for a very long time. And of course, this is why I find the Jubilee movement so inspiring, because with the burden of debts that a lot of these countries have, the best they can do, or the best they can hope to do, is adapt to the changes that are forthcoming. But of course, those adaptations, you know, as things get more severe and more frequent, those adaptations will not suffice. So yeah, we shouldn't build on adaptation. We should look for mitigation. You know, we should go to the source and look for mitigation. But again, as I always say, we can't stop. We can't talk about climate change without talking about the history of climate change. You know, how we got here, the sciences, etc., and also the geography. So we look at that. I'm beginning to ramble. I shall stop there, and I appreciate all your beautiful faces. I will see you soon. Thank you.
Oh, Nick, it's so good to hear from you. Thank you so much. We are a little push for time. There's a question for you in the chat, and I don't know if you got access to that. If you don't,
I do.
Did you want to? Would you like to speak to that? Or
yeah, sure. Hi, Paolo. Wonderful to see you. It's been a while. My gosh, how inspiring you always are. Yes, they had a vision, and this is where perhaps I will, sorry, Paolo's question, in case anyone can't see it, is did the Ugandan community you described also have a unifying vision? They had a vision, but that vision was in many ways shaped by the NGO that sort of got them together. And that NGO was funded by an American company, unfortunately. Well, I say unfortunately, you know, it depends on, you know, their visions, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to say is that the vision was not initially horizontal, community driven, but it came top down, and I found that quite problematic in certain ways. But that being said, after a year or two, they owned it. They seized it and owned it, and what they wanted, you know, the NGO initially just wanted to help them build units, housing units for themselves, but they said no, we want water, we want electricity, we want farmland, and so they sort of owned the projects after that time. But it's often the case, and this is the again a dilemma of movements, you know, the NGOization of movements in many respects. But in as you will often find in the global South, there aren't many movements. Have to become NGOs effectively in order to operate. And NGOs, as I always say, are movements with their wings clipped, and so the visions are constrained within the system, as it were.
Thanks, Nick.
Mm.
Amazing. Shiri, are you okay to speak now? Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, and thanks for everyone who spoke before me. That was yeah, interesting and a lot to think and reflect on what Phoenix was saying about spaces and sort of different models of mutual aid that we saw through COVID, which I would probably not describe as mutual aid in the traditional sense. And I'm here to talk about Cooperation Town, which is another model that myself and sort of colleagues have developed over the last few years. In a nutshell, it's a movement or a network of community food co-ops that have sort of that we're supporting to develop all over the country. So there are autonomous groups organizing around food in their own communities up and down the country, with different levels of kind of organizing support from us. Just a very brief sort of context for that, or to kind of to the stuff that I was doing before, or why I'm doing this. So I come from a background in trade union organizing, in anti-fascist organizing, and feminist organizing, and all those sort of forms of activities are always sort of organizing at the point of conflict, in very obvious places, out with the workplace, on the street. And at some point in 2018, 2019, sort of started to develop this idea of, we're not doing too well if we always have to organize at the point of conflict. And what is it that we can do in our communities? And very clearly speaking about working class communities, how can we organize before we have to fight the fash, or before we have to fight our bosses or our landlords? What kind of power we can develop with our neighbors, with the people who share the same sort of, environment or the same resources with us already. It could be our schools or our churches or our mosques. What kind of power we can develop so that we're ready for the next attack under the hostile environment, or under the Tories, or under whoever, it really doesn't matter. So we developed the model of the community food co-op, which are essentially groups of neighbors buying their food together. It's very, very simple. It's a simple structure. It's a co-op. I'm sure I don't need to explain, but maybe for other people listening, the co-op movement started in this country about 150 years ago, when literally a bunch of neighbors said, we all go to the shop every day. Why don't we own the shop? Why are we making somebody else rich to meet our needs? And that is, in a nutshell, that is the kind of the concept of co-ops, of cooperatives. There are groups or kind of structures that are owned and run by their own members for their own need, based on the principle of mutual aid, of mutual support within the community, and then beyond that, between cooperation between co-ops and so on. So the model that we developed, like I said, it's very simple. It's 20 households. Usually it's people who live on the same estate or the same street, or again, going to the same church, or whatever sort of link already exists. They don't have to be geographical communities. They could be, for example, in Manchester, we are now supporting a queer food co-op. So the sort of different definitions of community, but all of us need to eat. And all of us need sort of access to basic other items, like, I don't know, cleaning products, or non-controversial stuff like toilet paper. We can obviously access more of it, and at a lower cost if we do this together. So again, very, very basic idea. Our co-ops, and when I say our co-ops, I mean co-ops in our movement, in the Cooperation Town movement. So they might be located anywhere, and kind of maybe have different, slightly different shapes and forms and kind of membership makeup. But the co-ops that are part of the Cooperation Town movement, they organize usually on a weekly cycle. Members pool resources together. That means that every member, every household put in a small amount towards their own shopping. So they don't pay us, they don't pay any kind of NGO structure or any kind of meta structure that is running it, because in a co-op there are no bosses and there are no managers. It is those 20 households who organize on their own terms around what they need, and they buy the food together, and they usually access something like 5 times, maybe 6, 7 times the value of the money that they pay in. So let's say people pay £5 a week, go home with shopping worth around maybe £35, maybe around that amount. So the saving is significant. People save around 40% of their weekly shop. This is obviously, that means a lot to a lot of us. It's going to mean even more now with everything, you know, getting more expensive. It means that we can maybe use our time better to do something else. You know, I can spend more time with my child, but I can also spend more time organizing in my community, possibly around other things. And we already can see, we know that members of the co-ops in our movement, they develop, you know, beyond organizing skills, and I'm going to talk about it in a minute, they develop social bonds on, you know, we get to meet our neighbors. Basically, it's organizing with our neighbors. And people from that develop other forms of organizing and kind of asking questions about, you know, other things. Why is everything so expensive? Why is my neighbor being evicted? So we could see members in the co-ops in our movement organizing around housing, around migrant support, around other concerns in their communities, because they've met their neighbors, they've developed the confidence, they accepted that they have got the right, the permission, and maybe the duty to work with others in the community to, you know, to respond to these problems in a collective way. To do that, I'm going to be really brief and sort of focus on actions. We developed a set of resources. We developed sort of a framework and a model that anyone can adopt. You don't need to be an activist. To be fair, I think I said to you, Rob, normally I don't speak to activists because, well, A, they don't organize food co-ops. And that is unfortunately the case in many places, either because they're too invested in theory or because they're too damn busy, you know, like Marvina said. But the set of sort of principles that we share are very easy, very accessible. We developed this, I don't know if you can see, the starter pack. I will put a link to it in the chat. Anyone can pick it up, and you know, we can send you a printed copy or you can download it. We're working on sort of other formats. We're working on a comic strip and on a film, just to explain, you know, to make sure that we can share those ideas and those principles and sort of organizing methodology in a more accessible way. What usually happens is that somebody in the community, usually it'll be a woman, usually it'll be somebody who is already sort of know their neighbors and kind of think about those things. They would be the community anchor who would reach out to other neighbors, start the conversation. They would sometimes reach out to us and we will support them with more resources and sort of just confidence, and take it from there. So I will put in the chat now the link, but that is basically the story.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. And thanks for those resources. And I just want to say to everyone who's spoken already, thank you so much for being here. And it's just such an honor. And yeah, the next speaker is just incredible. Everyone's been incredible, but I want to introduce Sara Callaway. You're on mute.
Hi, am I off mute now? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. There is a background noise, but can you hear me all right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you for that very kind intro, and also for inviting, you know, Thomas Sankar's death for this event, because he's a very revolutionary and also was somebody who was very also of indigenous rights, and he also tried to protect the environment. I'll address the issue of a couple of points which I find useful, that, you know, women of color in the global women's strike, we're campaigning for a care income. And during this, it did get to be talked about and raised up the agenda. And it was it was clear that caring was essential, you know, that people were paid to stay at home. There was, you know, millions and probably billions were paid for people to stay at home and look after themselves and their loved ones. But, you know, and obviously caring work it's always been indispensable. But although the money was paid out, they don't want to pay women for doing the work that we do. And we know that obviously women are the biggest burden we carry is poverty, which is leads to the, you know, domestic violence and other violence we face. And resources we care. We are looking after children, our loved ones. We move looking after our families, the society, the land, and so on. So, I mean, obviously, we approach it from an international point of view, and we feel like that is the only way to be seriously anti-racist. Is we have to be international. For example, the fact is that 70% of small farmers are women, and they're feeding communities around the world, but that's often at the bottom of the agenda. Nobody can do without caring work. You know, we have to care for ourselves and other people. And we just heard about a project, for example, called Queer Carers, where queer people were, there was a fund to pay people for the help that the queer community needed. And we think that's happening all around, but no one is talking about it. No one is raising it up the way it should be in movements. We know, for example, that with the cost of living crisis, millions of children are in poverty, and that means that mothers are in poverty. Children don't have basic things like access to free lunch. And, you know, unless every movement, it seems to us, needs to be addressing the issue of women's poverty and children's poverty, because otherwise, how do we have the space, the time, and the resources to be out organizing in the community? And one of the previous speakers mentioned, you know, the fact that, you know, when she goes out, it's often women who are essential to the projects, but very often, you know, on the panels, it will be men, or getting the funding, it will be men. It won't be the grassroots women who actually start the projects and do the work. And it does relate to the issue of NGOs, which the brother touched on, because often the NGOs are taking funds that should be at the grassroots. They're starting projects, watering down demands, and putting forward the things that are not what the community wants. And in fact, it's for a few people to get funding rather than everyone who does caring work to have money directly in their own hands. And by that, when we talk about caring work, we mean, like, for example, farmers who look after the soil, groups like some of the ones on this meeting today. We should have money in our own hands to do the organizing that we want to do. And at the forefront of that would be the caring work that mothers do. Mothers, often mothers and grandmothers, are doing that work day in, day out. We're working with on the issue of natural farming with women in Anthropodesh, which we can put some links up about that later. And we've launched a care income, which is a care income survey. And what we're doing is asking 1,000 women and carers and all carers to fill out the survey so that we actually have what women want, because they never ask us what we want, what work we do, and what we need. In the survey, I'll try to post the link here, or I'll get Rob to circulate it. Last point is that we have to get rid of the billionaires and the fossil fuel companies, because they have our money, and we have to shift that money back to the community and into women's hands. I'll stop there. I think there's going to be an announcement just now, so I'll go back on mute, but please ask any questions or be in touch with us, Women of Color in the Global Women's Strike, at WOC_GWS. Thank you very much again for inviting us, and we hope to keep in touch. Please also visit us at Crossroads Women's Center. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So much, everything you do. and just embodying that, I think, just incredible compassion to always answer the call and to always put yourself out there, and to just, it's so inspiring and very moving, and I'm just really grateful that you're here. So I think that's all of the speakers who were able to make it or who were able to stay. So it would be good now to open it to the floor. I just wanted to make a few remarks really quickly because it is Thomas Sankara Day, and I mentioned this in an XR rally yesterday. But when you're born very innocent, and you're born without debt. And I'm speaking as a white man who was sent to a boarding school in this country when I was 8 years old, and learning more and more about this country. No thanks to that boarding school, I'll say. And at some point in time, you grow up and you suddenly feel like you've taken on some of the guilt, some of the burden, some of the other elements of your society just by living in that capitalist society. And when you're looking around the world in 2022, and yesterday, literally many people had written speeches overnight, and then over the course of the day, with the firing of Kwasi Kwarteng and with the Jeremy Hunt enlisting and things like that, most people's speeches were already out of date. We're at such a level of catastrophe that it's happening so fast, it's hard even to know how to say a word that can remain relevant. So it's difficult at these times to kind of not feel a little bit overwhelmed and not feel an element of despair. And one of the things I tried to say yesterday was to echo the words of Thomas Sankara, which is, he said, we are heirs to the world's revolutions. And I think it's really important to see in so many of our works that actually not only are our movements so aligned in many ways, but we're also aligned in our tradition, in our history, and in all the groups that have come before us and have done so much organizing, that we are a part of that tradition. And I want to say a few more quotes of Thomas Sankara that I think are worth repeating always, but I'll keep it brief. The fight for the tree and the forest is above all an anti-imperialist battle, because imperialism is an arsonist of our forests and savannas. And he said the popular masses in Europe are not opposed to the popular masses in Africa. Those who want to exploit Africa are the same ones who exploit Europe. We have a common enemy. I think those bear repeating. Sarah, did you want to say something?
Oh, sorry, I accidentally raised my hand. There was one thing I wanted to say, that I don't think we as people of color, we don't want white people to feel guilty or bad. The point is, we need white people to organize with us as people of color. And someone talked about the divides, and that is the hard thing, is crossing the divides, because we sometimes working with groups that would call themselves horizontal, but the racism, the sexism, the homophobia is there because it's from the day we're born, it's patterned in to the lives that we live. So we need people, it's to acknowledge it and then work against it, but not to feel guilty. And also, we don't want separatism. We don't want to just have groups that are, Black people only, because as it's clearly not all Black people are with us. Like was this the treasurer, the chancellor who just stood down, Priti Patel, people like that they're not on our side. And so we fight against the separatism. And I think it's so, and then to be accountable to the women at the grassroots who are working hardest. Those are the things that we need from white people. And those are the things that we need from men in relation to women. Those things can change everything, and recognizing our unpaid work and the fact that we need money for it. And so that we're independent and can make our own decisions about how we want to organize and what we want to do.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So shall we, I know we've lost Nick as well, so there aren't that many of the speakers here, but it would be good to open the floor. I know Darcy and Sai had wanted to say something.
I guess that was Sai. Yeah, really big thank you to all the speakers, and even they're going to have to go through out of the airways and into real space to try and find them, but they're not here at the moment. But everyone made a really important contribution, and I think I'd like to also share maybe some ideas and thoughts around some of the work which Rob's already talked about, that we've been engaged in. But I kind of just in the course of this meeting and listening to everyone speaking, the couplets which we introduced which went in the order of mutual aid, community power, system change, I think are actually really quite useful. I mean, I think that community power is the connection which runs between mutual aid and system change. So when Nick said mutual aid by itself is not enough, it isn't enough by itself. And we go out and we do a food distribution, or we think about warm banks and things where we can help out. And that isn't going to change the whole of society. But what the mutual aid aspect does is to create that opposition to the system. It creates that sense of community rather than individual. It brings people together just through that work. That's the mutual aid. And then the things that Sara was talking about, and to an extent, what Phoenix was talking about, are the ways that you then start to build power behind communities, and you're integrated in the community as well. You are part of the community rather than something separate. And I kind of see like that is where the power comes, which is then able to confront the system itself to bring about the change. And we know what the change needs to be. The other thing I feel is I totally get that notion that our enemies never sleep. And I understand that notion of the division of the left. But I feel we must not overestimate their unity. The events of the last few days have indicated that actually there is not a unity amongst our enemies. They are also divided. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what the next move is going to be. We don't know their move. And they also hold an awful lot of power, which kind of we internalize and take on. I think too much responsibility. So I think that there's obvious differences in the left, and those differences are important. It's not. We can't possibly say that because we're opposed to the system, or we want a very, very different vision, that we are all absolutely on the same page. There are differences, and it's building that unity across the difference that's important, to recognize the difference. They don't need to be divisions. And I think it's, and I think it's this notion also of we're engaged in revolt, we're engaged in the act of revolution, the act of producing the system change that we want, but we need to balance that with the inspiration. And I kind of feel that's where so much where being in community, being connected to the organizations, being connected with people of who are in the large part, because it is mutual aid, there has to be that sense of helping out, and that they are the ones who the system has most marginalized, most vulnerabilized, and we are, and therefore we have far greater vision of what needs to happen by being in those groups and being above and working just in the protest, just in the revolt. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Si. Sarah, is that a legacy hand or is that a new hand?
Sorry, a legacy hand. Sorry.
No, don't apologise. Are there any more comments or questions for anyone here, or just want to open to discussion? Knuckles, good to see you.
See you too. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. So I just wanted to ask. So I'm involved in a couple of groups that I've talked a lot about mutual aid and some who are currently practicing what they understand as mutual aid, and there's quite a large debate within them about the differences between mutual aid and charity. And so mutual aid is a very big term in a lot of leftist groups at the moment. And as I say, I think a lot of what is actually charity gets passed off as mutual aid. And I was just curious, obviously the idea of the difference between them is this feedback back into the community of the people putting in the, whatever it is, the resource. And I was just wondering what sort of practical distinctions people here who are involved in mutual aid practices would make between mutual aid as work and then charity work, which has this kind of slightly more problematic power dynamic that doesn't involve the feedback. And I was just wondering if people here who are involved in that could give some thoughts on that.
Shiri?
Yeah, I'm happy to share the kind of working definition that we kind of organize around. I mean, it's a definition between charity and solidarity in my mind. And I suppose solidarity, according to how we organize, is supporting people on their own terms. So it's not on our terms. It's not on the term of the people who want to give or who have the resources. And then maybe you get bored, or maybe you run out of money, or maybe you have to go back to work because you're no longer furloughed. And I think that was the perfect example with the mutual aid groups that supposedly mutual aid groups that emerged with the first lockdown. They were, I mean, if I'm being really kind of quite harsh and maybe maybe rude to some people, I mean, they were kind of a middle class hobby activism type thing, really. And they were very much on the terms of the people who wanted to be in them. And when they got bored or had to go back to work, that was the end of mutual aid. Obviously, when you're organizing your own community, you share the problems, you share the resources, you share the solutions. And that this is, and you do it on your own terms. Hope that's useful.
Knuckles, you want to jump in?
Yeah, if possible. I mean, the reason I ask, and the reason I think it's particularly pertinent to people in my position is because I'm a student at the moment, and I organize in primarily student groups. And obviously students have got a bit of a history of having quite a parasitic relationship on the local communities that they find themselves in. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah,
cool. And as I say, do have this don't have this real engagement often with the local communities that they are geographically located in. And as I say, I feel like a lot of student activism does have this student activism around mutual aid does have this one-sided dynamic of this sort of with this charitable emphasis where it's non-student bubble, apart from when you're I don't know, making sandwiches for homeless or whatever, and I'm just curious as to really aren't students, but just for any advice for students involved in this practice to make sure that they don't fall down this avenue that is just does maintain that it's under the mutual aid banner becomes this sort of slightly more charitably whatever.
Shiri, would you be able to speak to that? Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I suppose that brings up quite a lot, but I mean, students, from my experience, and I think I kind of mentioned it before, I don't normally speak to activists, not anymore. you know, I've done this for years, set of the reading groups, and, you know, I didn't go to university myself, so I don't have, you know, I didn't have to deal with that particular concern. My personal sort of involvement with education is setting up an organization called the Anti-University, which is, again, organizing outside and against the sort of neoliberal university. So again, on our own terms, and sort of without asking for permission, and without paying shit ton of money. But I also appreciate the students are, because of the neoliberal university and the rest of society organizing around it, are super precarious. People don't stay in the same place for a very long time, and that's because our landlords are parasites. And, you know, we kind of in you know, that kind of neoliberalism like informs every part of our lives, like from the extraction of university to the extractions of landlords. So students are not probably best positioned to work in their communities if they're not developing those community links over time, because it takes time. Having said that, as a student, you know, you're facing loads of issues that concerning your own community that you can definitely organize around. It doesn't have to be this kind of idea of, you know, oh, those poor people outside who may be poorer than myself, because let's face it, it costs a lot of money to go to uni, or who might be, you know, I don't know, the single mums and the whatever kind of, you know, platonic poor that we can imagine. You have loads of issues to deal with as a student. You've got, you know, the university to organize around and against. You've got the hostile environment within your university. You know, they're just, you know, you've got the university as a landlord. So there is enough to organize around without feeling like you're parachuting into somebody else's campaign, or kind of without being the kind of white savior. It is possible. I mean, I can't imagine, you know, and I come from a working class community. I can't imagine the working class neighbor who would want to see a student coming and telling us how to organize. It just doesn't work like that. Having said that, making sandwiches, 100%. You know, when we were organizing at the LSE on the picket lines at, you know, 7 o'clock in the morning, the students who made the sandwiches and served the tea, yeah, that's solidarity. You know, we were grateful and we were happy. And that is a good way that, you know, the kind of two communities and two different concerns can kind of work in solidarity.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It feels like one of the common threads here. I mean, Sara said it beautifully, of like crossing the divide. It's always a difficult thing to cross that divide, and some divides, you know, will take lots of steps to get anywhere near across them, and you find yourself in a position because of how you cross it, like, you know, making sandwiches in that way as well. And we've definitely found the different ways in which we've done meals with the Jubilee campaign has been hard, you know, depending on, you know, who did we talk to? Did we talk to enough people? You know, how many different groups in the community that is you know, in London. We did one in Islington, which is an extremely like weird community to do any sort of any of that work in. There's a lot of difficulty there, and it feels like we didn't do it that well in some ways. You know, we didn't get it all right. So how do we go, okay, so we didn't get that all right, we didn't speak to enough people, or whatever that is. How do you throw up your hands and say, okay, so we've got to, you know, try and do it correctly so that we can do this? And maybe we just didn't do it right. And I think there's also a level, speaking to something Sai was saying earlier, and speaking also to something that Nick was saying earlier, of like this being one of many potentially tactics that we need to all be employing in our communities. And if you're in the university, exactly, organizing within your student context. And it was interesting being at the Rebellion yesterday. It was quite a small crowd, but it meant that I got to speak to lots of people, and it's just really interesting to see how many different communities every single person works in. You know, they come along for the Rebellion, but they're actually involved in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other different things that they've been doing. There is often an educational gap, and so there's a compassion element there of going, how do we, you know, get these ideas, get these, not ideas so much, the work that we're doing to different groups, everything that Sara has been saying. How do we platform and amplify the messages and the marginalized communities that need to be amplified and platformed at those moments? And it just, that's the work that we're doing. That's always difficult. But compassion, I think, is really important for for the different groups that are in their own different ways struggling at the divide, and that's where, yeah, I think that's where it's really exciting what we're doing. I wanted to ask if there are any last questions or comments before we round up, because we're at an hour and a half now. Alex.
I just wanted to say how completely fabulous I found this event. Really interesting array of speakers and really interesting range of opinions and viewpoints. I've loved it. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Paolo?
Just very quickly, the Phoenix mentioned that he's gone to an event at SOAS, which is where I've been working this week. And Shiri's idea of an anti-university, it's something that, you know, I think that would be a good description of what we've been doing there. Anti-neoliberal university, you know, trying to hold the School of Oriental and African Studies to its decolonial mission, and the interactions with students there, you know, those who came out and helped us get into the toilets and access tea and so forth, were those from oppressed communities mainly. It was an interesting interaction and still going
on. Sai and Darcy?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I've heard so many ideas that I really think we could, you know, trial in Sheffield, and you know, I've been so inspired. So I want to say thank you, huge thank you to Shiri and Sara and the others that have already left this meeting. It's been brilliant. Just so imaginative, and you kind of, some of these things seem so imaginative, and yet when you hear somebody say they've been doing these things for a long time, you think, well, why haven't we thought of that? It's like some of these things feel like they're just the right thing to be doing, so the right thing to be doing. So I feel really grateful. So thank you ever so much.
Yeah, brilliant. I just want to say thank you to everyone else, everyone here, everyone who's not here anymore as well. If anyone else wants to say thank you, feel free to unmute. I'm going to turn the recording off now, and we can end this session just nicely and openly.